partir de hoy, 10 patrullas del Departamento de la Policía equipados con una computadora que identificará a la persona que el oficial detenga por cualquier violación de la ley. Según el jefe de la policía, Charles Rodríguez, esta computadora ayudará considerablemente a los oficiales y la meta es que todas las patrullas cuenten con ese equipo.
Es darle la oportunidad al patrullero que revise y que pueda hacer investigaciones tocante licencias de automóviles, de personas que sospechosas y propiedad que está robada y todo eso, y lo va a poder hacer así inmediatamente.
Las computadoras adaptadas a los autos tienen un costo de $3,000 cada una y la computadora portátil tiene un costo de $3,000.
La primera cosa que hacemos es ponemos el número de la licencia en la computadora esta y luego nos manda el registro o lo que sea para atrás, como en unos 20 segundos. Y nos dice si la persona la anda buscando a la policía.
Con este sistema se sabrá si las personas tienen antecedentes criminales, si los autos son robados o bien si las licencias de automóviles son falsas.
Eyewitness News, San Antonio's top-rated newscast.
The San Antonio Police Department is planning to intensify educational efforts on gun safety. This comes in the wake of a rash of shooting accidents involving children. Police Chief Charles Rodriguez is urging parents to use caution.
Primary concern should be teaching the parents where to put guns and where to leave them and so forth. Seeing as our children have a natural curiosity, and certainly we want to tell kids not to play with guns, but that's sometimes like telling them, not to eat candy, sure.
In two recent shooting incidents, a 5-year-old child died Saturday, and a teenage boy is still fighting for his life at Medical Center Hospital after suffering an accidental gunshot wound. In both incidents, police say children were playing with guns that were left out in their homes.
Eyewitness News, San Antonio's top-rated newscast.
A San Antonio attorney who represents the family of slain drug dealer Fred Carrasco says a young man charged with attempted capital murder is not who he claims to be. A 23-year-old man identified as Federico Gomez Carrasco Jr. was arrested Sunday night outside the San Juan homes for allegedly shooting at 2 San Antonio police officers. Norma Barnes has the story.
This was the scene outside the Walls unit of the state prison in Huntsville in 1974. Fred Gomez Carrasco and 2 other inmates killed 2 hostages during a bloody insurrection that lasted for 11 days. It became the longest prison hostage siege in United States history before officers stormed the building and shot the inmates to death.
At this time, our records and our investigation doesn't substantiate what has been put out there.
The chief is talking about reports that the young man jailed here for allegedly firing a sawed-off shotgun at 2 San Antonio police officers is the son of the notorious drug dealer Fred Carrasco. But is he really?
I know for a fact that this boy is not his son, or Fred would have related this to me when he made his last will and testament at the penitentiary before he was killed.
Montemayor says Carrasco only mentioned his wife Rosa and their 3 children. After the aborted breakout, he says another woman claimed to be Carrasco's wife, saying he had fathered her son, but she had no proof.
The family states that Fred was in the penitentiary. He was there a year and a half while this boy was born. There is no way in the world that it could have been his.
Police say they saw a photograph in the suspect's apartment of a man they recognized as Fred Carrasco. Who the suspect's father was or is, of course, doesn't really have anything to do with the legal facts of the attempted murder case against him. But it does raise the interesting question. Is it a case of a man trying to live up to the image of his namesake? Norma Barnes, Channel 5 Eyewitness News.
Serving San Antonio and South Texas.
There has been a rash of accidental shootings here of late. In several recent cases, children playing with loaded guns has resulted in serious injuries or even deaths. In one case over the weekend, a 5-year-old was killed when he and his 14-year-old stepbrother were playing with a loaded handgun which went off accidentally. Police Chief Charles Rodriguez says the key to stopping tragedies like that is educating parents about storing guns.
Our primary concern should be teaching the parents where to put guns and where to leave them and so forth. Seeing as our children have a natural curiosity, and certainly we want to tell kids not to play with guns, but that's sometimes like telling them, you know, not to eat candy.
Experts say ammunition should be kept separate from weapons at home.
James Manuel Elliott, de 5 años de edad, murió instantáneamente después de que su medio hermano Kevin Hayes le disparó accidentalmente con un arma calibre 38. Debido a este incidente y a otros similares, el jefe del Departamento de Policía, Charles Rodriguez, hizo un llamado a las personas que poseen armas para que tengan más precaución acerca de dónde dejan el arma guardada, especialmente si son padres de familia. El Departamento de Policía dijo que los padres deberían de tener más precaución.
Enviamos a los padres de hijos, especialmente esos que tienen pistolas en la casa, tienen armas en las casas, que tengan mucho cuidado, que no dejen las pistolas así nomás de vista, que pongan las pistolas, que les saquen las cartuchas y pongan las cartuchas por otro lado y las pistolas así separadas para que si los niños hallan las pistolas no tienen las cartuchas.
El jefe de la policía también enfatizó que se van a tratar de imponer más restricciones para la adquisición de armas.
This is News 4 San Antonio at 5.
An angry police chief faced reporters today at his weekly news conference. Charles Rodriguez labeled a weekend printed news story as sensationalism and said it was based on locker room gossip and rumors. The story in the San Antonio Light newspaper claimed Lou Fox had said he had a killer cop on his hands and that he couldn't get rid of him. The story was based on the shooting death of an individual who was breaking into a pickup truck 3 years ago. Rodriguez called the story unprofessional.
But to have a story printed about what is taking place in the department without justification or substantiation to the extent that we can prove anything, I think is really, as far as I'm concerned, unprofessional.
He went on to say that the matter had been thoroughly investigated and that a report had been sent to the DA who refused to take further action. Yes. That produced this confrontation between Rodriguez and the reporter who wrote the story.
You're saying you sent a case to the district attorney based solely on locker room chat?
No, we're saying that you wrote the story based on locker room rumor.
Rodriguez says the homicide case on which the story had been based is still open, and the officer involved is still in good standing with the police force. But he says the officer could be facing disciplinary action on another matter. We contacted the San Antonio Light about the chief's comments. Assistant Managing Editor Ed Rodemaker told us they didn't wish to appear in front of a camera, but they are standing behind their story.
Eyewitness News, San Antonio's top-rated newscast.
Good afternoon. San Antonio's chief of police is miffed, and the target of his anger is a local newspaper.
Chief Charles Rodriguez today accused the San Antonio Light of sensationalism in the wake of a Sunday front-page story focusing on a, quote, killer cop, unquote, patrolling the streets of San Antonio. Russell Rhodes is in our downtown bureau with more on the chief's reaction.
Kelly, the chief says his personal reaction to the story is that it is a disservice to the department because it assumes things and has half information. And the chief says it takes 1 or 2 incidents and makes them into a novel.
The article appeared on the front page of Sunday's San Antonio Light. The central focus, the December 28, 1982 shooting death of 22-year-old Bobby Folsom. Folsom and a friend were allegedly breaking into a pickup when the shooting occurred. The incident was featured on an Eyewitness News Crime Stoppers report. The Bobby Folsom case was never solved, but the Sunday Light says there are many in law enforcement who believe a San Antonio policeman did the shooting.
And eyewitness news sources confirmed that there was that suspicion immediately following the incident. But Chief Rodriguez says this and other complaints against the officer have been thoroughly investigated, and where it was necessary to submit information to the district attorney, it was done.
So the district attorney has made decisions based on investigations that we have made, and in this particular case, the investigation regarding the officer and the allegations in the newspaper were thoroughly investigated, and were presented to the district attorney, and the district attorney then found that there wasn't sufficient evidence to do any kind of prosecuting.
The chief confirms the officer in question has 5 internal affairs complaints against him, with 1 currently pending.
Do you feel he's a good officer, or would you like him?
Well, in terms of his competency, he's a good officer. In terms of what apparently he's being accused of, he may have some problems, yes.
When asked if he will take the officer who was allegedly responsible for the shooting off the street, the chief says he doubts it. And when asked, the chief says he will not deny the article. But Kelly, these are his words. He says the article was calculated towards sensationalism.
Okay, Rusty, thank you from
Thank
the
you, Kelly.
Downtown Bureau.
Serving San Antonio and South Texas. Now, KSAT 12 News.
Saying is that there are allegations being made. One is that things occurred and that we have a, quote, killer cop.
Good evening, I'm Rick Benjamin.
And I'm Deborah Daniels. Reports of a killer cop today forced Police Chief Charles Rodriguez to defend his department and its investigation of a shooting death 3 years ago. The allegations center around a 6-year veteran officer. He refused to go on camera, but he did talk to our police beat reporter Mary Walker about the allegations that he cold-bloodedly gunned down a car burglar in a vigilante-styled shooting.
Police officer Stephen Smith says he was questioned in the 1982 murder, told by investigators they thought it was funny he was there at the scene. Smith said he was at the scene because his girlfriend lived in the apartment complex where the murder occurred. During the investigation, Smith says he took 2 lie detector tests. A 10-minute exam given by the police department was inconclusive. A second polygraph, in which he says he hired an examiner, was about 2 hours long. Smith says he passed that one. He also claims that he offered to bring detectives all of his off-duty weapons to aid in the investigation. And he told me he offered to allow Homicide Lieutenant Jack Summey to search his entire house the very first time Smith was questioned. The officer says he realizes that public outcry could cause the case to go before the grand jury, and he does worry about that. We first met Patrolman Stephen Smith while preparing a report on officers who were forced to shoot in the line of duty. He talked to me in the summer of 1982 about one of the situations in which he shot and wounded a robbery suspect.
When we yelled halt, he dropped the bags and flipped the shotgun up so he was holding it in both hands. And then he just pivoted and whirled around, and I shot him.
You shot him 6 times. You obviously felt that was necessary.
Oh, yeah, I was scared. The reason I kept pulling the trigger was because he kept standing. He didn't go down until the last shot.
Officials say Smith has been involved in other police-related shootings, one in which a car prowler was killed by Smith and another officer after the prowler pulled a weapon on the 2 policemen in a Kmart parking lot. That shooting was declared justifiable by a grand jury. The police chief confirmed today Smith has had 5 other internal affairs complaints, 2 involving assaults on civilians. Smith has been on the police department since 1979. Mary Walker, KSAT 12 News.
Also today, Police Chief Charles Rodriguez said the reports about the alleged killer cop are sensational and full of half-truths and inaccuracies. And Rodriguez says the department has thoroughly investigated the charges.
Things like that don't happen. What we're saying is that there are allegations being made. One is that things occurred and that we have a, quote, killer cop, which is very sensational as far as I'm concerned, running around the city, and that's an assumption as far as the information we have. And 2, that the department didn't do anything about it, and that's also, that in fact is a false assumption.
Now the chief says he has no plans to take the officer off the street. He added if there is a dirty, his term, cop on the force, the department will do whatever is necessary to take care of that problem.
El jefe de la policía de San Antonio, Charles Rodríguez, dijo que no existe ningún oficial de su departamento que esté tomando la ley en sus propias manos. Rodríguez agregó que el caso del policía Smith se ha convertido en un tema sensacionalista debido a que los diarios locales han escandalizado la información y ha puesto datos que no son ciertos. Rodríguez enfatizó que si un oficial cometiera algún crimen, recibiría el mismo castigo que cualquier otro ciudadano.
Y yo digo que es una acusación en el periódico que no está justificada. Sí, el patrullero se ha metido en varias cosas y fue como uno de los sospechosos en una de las matanzas que ocurrió. Pero la investigación por el Departamento de Homicide presentó la investigación al Departamento del District Attorney y ellos hallaron que no había suficiente evidencia para cargarlo con esa ofensa.
Rodríguez agregó que si existen algunos cargos en contra del oficial Smith y que ya se están tomando las medidas necesarias. Relacionado con el caso del policía que parece ser ha tomado la justicia en sus propias manos, el concejal Walter Martínez envió el día de hoy una carta al gerente de la ciudad Lou Fox en donde se exige una explicación completa sobre todo lo que ocurrió y concretamente quiere saber por qué se mantuvo en secreto ese caso por espacio de aproximadamente 2 años.
Evidentemente han hecho una investigación. Me preocupa a mí que no nos han avisado como al concilio, al mayor, y nosotros no sabíamos nada de esto. Y parece que esto es algo que tiene como 3 años de haber pasado o de haber ocurrido.
¿Y a quién culpa usted de que no le hayan comunicado?
Bueno, principalmente a las autoridades que están responsables del Departamento de Policía, también como el gerente que tiene responsabilidad sobre el Departamento de Policía y principalmente el gerente de la ciudad.
Por lo menos 3 concejales ya han manifestado su apoyo a la petición hecha por el concejal Martínez.
This is News 4 San Antonio at 6.
A weekend story in a San Antonio newspaper sparked some angry comments this morning from Police Chief Charles Rodriguez. The story implied that a police officer may have been responsible for the vigilante-style killing of a man breaking into a pickup truck 3 years ago. The chief told reporters that a report of the incident had been sent to the DA's office, who in turn decided to take no further action. Rodriguez was asked about his reaction to the newspaper's story.
People can write stories on assumptions, misinformation, and without verification. And then later on correcting it a little bit, and then, that's it.
Then he was asked why the story had been brought to the San Antonio Light after a period of 3 years.
Probably because we have a reporter that's digging. And he has been getting into everything and everyone, and in fact even has attempted to talk to some of our people above and beyond the Public Information Office. So that's probably the reason for it.
That's certainly a crime.
It sure is. Mr. Cardwell.
Chief Rodriguez says the officer in question may be facing disciplinary action on another matter, but he emphatically denied any cover-up or whitewash of the incident covered in the San Antonio Light story. He also expressed concern about the effect the incident could have on his department's morale. We contacted the San Antonio Light this afternoon about the chief's comments. Assistant Managing Editor Ed Rademacher told us he didn't wish to appear in front of the camera, but they say they're standing behind their story.
Serving San Antonio and South Texas. Now, KSAT 12 News Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Rick Benjamin.
And I'm Deborah Daniels. In the past 2 days, we've been hearing a lot about a so-called killer cop, a policeman who was investigated for allegedly gunning down a car thief. The killing is described as a cold-blooded vigilante-style shooting. Our police beat reporter Mary Walker talked with the officer who's at the center of the controversy, and in this exclusive report, she has his side of the story.
Police officer Stephen Smith says he was questioned in the 1982 murder, told by investigators they thought it was funny he was there at the scene. Smith said he was at the scene because his girlfriend lived in the apartment complex where the murder occurred. During the investigation, Smith says he took 2 lie detector tests. A 10-minute exam given by the police department was inconclusive. A second polygraph, in which he says he hired an examiner, was about 2 hours long. Smith says he passed that one. He also claims that he offered to bring detectives all of his off-duty weapons to aid in the investigation. And he told me he offered to allow Homicide Lieutenant Jack Summey to search his entire house the very first time Smith was questioned. The officer says he realizes that public outcry could cause the case to go before the grand jury, and he does worry about that. We first met Patrolman Stephen Smith while preparing a report on officers who were forced to shoot in the line of duty. He talked to me in the summer of 1982 about one of the situations in which he shot and wounded a robbery suspect.
When we yelled halt, he dropped the bags and flipped the shotgun up so he was holding it in both hands. And then he just pivoted and whirled around, and I shot him.
He shot him 6 times. You obviously felt that was necessary?
Oh, yeah, I was scared. The reason I kept pulling the trigger was because he kept standing. He didn't go down until the last shot.
Officials say Smith has been involved in other police-related shootings, one in which a car prowler was killed by Smith and another officer after the prowler pulled a weapon on the 2 policemen in a Kmart parking lot. That shooting was declared justifiable by a grand jury. The police chief confirmed today Smith has had 5 other internal affairs complaints, 2 involving assaults on civilians. Smith has been on the police department since 1979. Mary Walker, KSAT 12 News.
Police Chief Charles Rodriguez had plenty of tough things to say today about those reports of the alleged cop killer on the city's force. The chief says the stories are sensational and full of inaccuracies, and he told reporters today the police department has fully investigated those charges.
The investigation regarding the officer and the allegations in the newspaper were thoroughly investigated, and were presented to the district attorney, and the district attorney then found that there wasn't sufficient evidence to do any kind of prosecuting.
Now, the chief says he has no plans to take Officer Smith off patrol. He says that if there is a dirty, his term, cop on the city's police force, the department will take care of that situation.
This is News 4 San Antonio at 5.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, we were given time to think about it. Now it's going to be enforced.
That's right. The grace period for the seatbelt law is almost over, and come Sunday, you could pay for not buckling up. Dan Cuellar in the newsroom with the law and how it's going to be enforced. Dan.
Lori, beginning this Sunday, December 1st, all motorists in Texas riding in the front seat of a vehicle will be required to wear a seatbelt or face the possibility of getting a traffic ticket. Now, that doesn't mean that officers will be parked on the side of the road with a pair of binoculars checking to see if you're wearing your belt, but they have vowed to be vigilant about it.
Those in violation will be issued a traffic citation that carries a fine of $25 to $50.
And, of course, the passenger riding in the front seat with them will get a separate ticket if they're not wearing their seatbelt.
The heads of the city, county, and state law enforcement agencies tried to make that quite clear this morning. And it seems a lot of people are going to have to get used to the requirement, because a random sample we took today at a downtown street corner reveals that many people are still not wearing their belts.
Right now, the only exemptions provided for in the seatbelt law are mail carriers when they're delivering their mail, and people who, for medical reasons, obtain a certificate from a doctor that because of their condition, medical condition, that it would be a detriment to them to wear a seatbelt.
So if you think you have some medical reason for not wearing a seatbelt, see your doctor for a written excuse. Otherwise, be prepared to get a traffic ticket if you're riding in the front seat of a car without a seatbelt.
Dan, though, how is this going to be enforced? I mean, are officers going to set up roadblocks where they can test people? The logistics of that seem incredible.
Well, that has not been ruled out. However, that is not planned right now. Primarily, the way it will work is that if you're traveling down the road and are stopped for a moving violation, say a speeding ticket, for instance, the officer will take the time to check to see if you're wearing your seatbelt. And if not, you'll get 2 tickets, one for the speeding violation and another for the seatbelt violation.
Not unlike the insurance law. All right, thank you very much, Dan.
serving San Antonio and South Texas.
If you're still refusing to wear your seatbelt when you drive these days, be forewarned that 90-day grace period for the new mandatory Texas seatbelt law ends on Sunday. Starting Sunday, December 1st, all drivers and front seat passengers will have to buckle up. But police say they won't be pulling over every driver who is seen not wearing their seatbelt.
What is going to happen is that as people are stopped for other violations, they will be checked to see if they have their seatbelts on. If not, they will have an added violation.
Violators will be fined $25 to $50. Some have also suggested that those ticketed for not buckling up be required to pay higher insurance premiums than those of us who wear our seatbelts.
Representantes de autoridades locales han hecho un llamado para recordar que a partir del próximo 1 de diciembre se multará a los automovilistas que no usen sus cinturones de seguridad. El jefe del Departamento de la Policía, Charles Rodríguez, pide la cooperación del público y enfatiza que se exigirá y revisará el uso de los cinturones en los asientos delanteros, principalmente cuando se cometan infracciones de tráfico.
Comenzando en diciembre, el primero de diciembre, se va a implementar la ley de los seatbelts, de los asientos de seguridad en los automóviles. Y lo que queremos decir es que comenzando diciembre primero vamos a enforzar la ley y que todas las gentes que manejan automóviles tienen que tener su cinto de seguridad, no nomás el manejador del automóvil, sino el pasajero.
El jefe Rodríguez agregó que se darán multas a cada uno de los pasajeros que no usen su cinturón y estas multas oscilarán entre los $25 y $50.
This is News 4 San Antonio at 6.
Tonight, City Councilwoman Maria Barriazabal is getting some top-level support in her efforts to close a near North Side night spot known as the Hi-Ho Lounge. The bar was the scene of a double murder last week, and residents reportedly have complained frequently about the lounge. Today, Police Chief Charles Rodriguez said he supports the councilwoman's efforts to close the bar, and he says he'll begin working toward that end.
I think whenever we have a problem with a lounge that is consistent and that is continuous, that we should make an effort to shut those places down, yes.
Lounges and clubs that serve alcoholic beverages in Texas are licensed by the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission. Those licenses can be revoked if a pattern of violent incidents or disturbances are found in any such establishment. The commission is currently looking into that double murder at the Hi-Ho Lounge.
Eyewitness News, San Antonio's top-rated newscast.
December 1st is a significant day in traffic safety efforts. It'll mark the first day of the new seatbelt law. This morning, 3 of Bexar County's leading law enforcement officers held a news conference to discuss the new law. At police headquarters, Chief of Police Charles Rodriguez, along with Sheriff Harlan Copeland and DPS Captain Randolph Gilmore, were on hand to tell how their officers will enforce the seatbelt law. Beginning Sunday, the law requires drivers and front seat passengers to wear seatbelts or be issued a traffic citation that carries a fine of $25 to $50.
Stopped for other violations, they will be checked to see if they have their seatbelts on. If not, they will have an added violation. If a person that's involved in a traffic accident does not have his seatbelts on or her seatbelts on, it is probably going to impact their insurance at some point. So.
Captain Gilmore says surveys taken in England show that seatbelts have cut down on traffic fatalities by 25%. He feels the belt will also save lives in Texas.
El comité de la Fiscalía que implementa en esta ciudad programas en contra del abuso físico de niños ha obtenido reconocimiento del gobernador Mark White. En nombre del gobernador, el representante estatal Dan Morales solicitó y juramentó de la directora de este comité para que se continúen estos programas. La directora Joyce Dryscan pidió a su vez el apoyo de toda la comunidad de San Antonio.
All the work that we've done, we have done some things to alert this community. But there is so much yet to be done. And so for all of those of us who have a professional or a personal role to play in the matter of child abuse, and even if it's not something you actively do, you have a role by helping to support those who do.
Los programas en contra del abuso de niños que se implementan en esta ciudad servirán de ejemplo para otras ciudades en el estado de Texas.
Serving San Antonio and South Texas.
They want to make sure that the victims of violent crimes are taken care of. That's why area law enforcement officers gathered at the convention center today with representatives from the Attorney General's office. The officers were instructed on ways to make sure that crime victims are aware of a special fund that awards them compensation for certain expenses. Police Chief Charles Rodriguez says that our city leads the way in the number of victims actually receiving money from the fund.
The idea behind the whole thing is for that victim that we have in the past neglected and who seems to be the one that's hurt the most hasn't been focused on, and I think this is one way of doing that.
Officials say funds are available for medical expenses, funeral costs, lost wages, and child care.
Históricamente, los familiares y víctimas de incidentes violentos pasan a segundo término, pues los esfuerzos de la ley se enfocan en el criminal. Desde hace varios años, en varios estados del país se ha creado un programa de compensación económica para ayudar a estas víctimas, y las autoridades de Texas están promoviendo esta ayuda para quienes sufren las consecuencias de actos criminales. Sonia Colín tiene más detalles.
We should never let crime go unnoticed. We should never let the criminal go unpunished.
Autoridades locales y estatales han emprendido una campaña para informar al público de sus derechos en caso de resultar víctima de un crimen. La legislatura estatal estableció desde 1980 un programa de compensación económica que, de acuerdo a la Procuraduría General, debido a desconocimiento, solo ha sido aprovechada por un 4% de las víctimas de Texas.
Estamos aquí para informar a los departamentos de policía que el programa existe y que necesitamos darle la información a la gente para que puedan aplicar. Como nomás 4% de los víctimas han aplicado, necesitamos que darles la información que existe el programa.
Por medio de este programa, fondos del Estado que provienen de multas en las cortes se destinan a indemnizar a las víctimas, y algunos de los beneficios pueden incluir pagos de salarios, gastos de entierros o asesoramiento psicológico de rehabilitación, entre otros. El proceso de cada caso se inicia a nivel local y después se investiga en la Procuraduría General.
Lo que hacemos nosotros es avisarle a las víctimas y luego avisamos al Estado para que estén ellos listos para ayudar. Les mandamos un reporte y el Estado, entonces ellos son los que siguen con la ayuda.
A pesar de la poca difusión de este programa, esta ciudad ha sido una de las más beneficiadas, pues de $7 millones que se destinaron a ayuda el año pasado, 1,5 millones fueron para San Antonio. Sonia Colín, Reporter 41.
Tanto la Fiscalía como el Departamento de Policía estarán proporcionando solicitudes e información a las personas que califiquen para este programa.
Serving San Antonio and South Texas. Now, KSAT 12 News at noon.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Angela Vierville. San Antonio Police Chief Charles Rodriguez says he will turn over alleged police brutality cases to the DA's office. Rodriguez, in his weekly news conference, says he plans to comply with a request by DA Sam Millsap asking that he be given all files in which citizens have alleged they were assaulted by police officers over the past 2 years.
My reaction to the letter is that it points out that perhaps there is a need for the public to understand what we're doing, and if it requires that the district attorney then look at what we're doing in terms of our investigations and so forth, then that's the direction we'll take if we have to.
Rodriguez says he's also reviewing the procedure of discipline for officers found guilty of using excessive force.
This is News 4 San Antonio at 5.
Good afternoon. A number of developments today involving the San Antonio Police Department.
That's right. News 4 anchor Dan Cuellar was summoned before a grand jury to testify on a series of reports that he did on concerns by a previous grand jury that there may have been a cover-up in the case of Officer Milton Beretta. Also, Chief Rodriguez responded to an inquiry from District Attorney Sam Millsap, who wants files on police abuse cases which reportedly were not sent to the DA's office for review and possible criminal prosecution. Today, the chief said this.
We plan to cooperate with the district attorney. If it's essential that we pass that on, I see no problems with it.
Now, the chief says that a police task force has been reviewing the manner in which police abuse cases are referred to the DA's office, a review he felt necessary because he felt there were problems with the process.
The best way to go would be to have the district attorney come and look at these things. This way, it'll be an outside agency doing this rather than ourselves.
Now, the chief expects to have changes in place by the end of the year and expects to have the DA's office participating in deciding what those changes should be. The DA had requested that his office be involved in the decision-making.
Serving San Antonio and South Texas. Now, KSAT 12 News.
Good evening. I'm Deborah Daniels.
And I'm Rick Benjamin. San Antonio's police chief, Charles Rodriguez, now says he will comply with a request made by the district attorney's office. KSAT 12's police beat reporter Mary Walker says the request involves alleged charges of police brutality.
The request came in this letter from the DA. It asked that Chief Charles Rodriguez send him internal affairs files involving valid cases in which citizens alleged they were assaulted by police officers. He wanted cases dating back 2 years. One of those allegations came from this man, Leroy Cibrian. He claims that earlier this year he was beaten while handcuffed by the police officer who arrested him. He says the case never went to the DA's office, but that the officer involved was reportedly reprimanded. Today, Chief Charles Rodriguez announced at a morning news conference that he would gather the internal affairs files requested by the DA and turn them over to that office.
My reaction to the letter is that it points out that perhaps there is a need for the public to understand what we're doing, and if it requires that the district attorney then look at what we're doing in terms of our investigations and so forth, then that's the direction we'll take if we have to.
Rodriguez says he is also reviewing the way officers are disciplined for valid complaints of alleged excessive force.
We're in the process of trying to strengthening up our procedures rather than our total policy. You know, as you go along, there are going to be times when perhaps information has to be more aggressively obtained. In other words, instead of having people come to us, we got to go to people.
Rodriguez says plans to tighten up the disciplinary procedure should be completed by the end of the year. Mary Walker, KSAT 12 News.
Según algunos informes publicados aquí en San Antonio, el número de casos de brutalidad policial ha llegado a 27, pero los mismos informes agregan que no todos los casos de violaciones de la ley por parte de la policía son reportados a la Fiscalía. Maite Franyuti tiene la información completa.
A consecuencia de un artículo publicado en un diario local el domingo pasado, el fiscal del distrito Sam Millsap envió una carta al jefe del departamento de policía, Charles Rodriguez, en la que le solicita se le envíen los expedientes de los ciudadanos que se hayan quejado de haber sido víctimas de la presunta brutalidad policíaca en los pasados 2 años. Así nos lo explica Roberto Arellano, subfiscal del distrito.
Queremos discutir con el jefe de la policía los casos que ellos tienen, a ver cuántos tienen. No estamos seguros cuántos van a ser. Sabemos que un reportero dijo que había cientos de números de causas, pero queremos discutir con ellos los que tienen ellos y los que han mandado para acá. Ya sabemos que hay unos que han mandado y nosotros hemos juzgado, pero queremos ver los que tienen ellos, que si son casos que se pueden juzgar o no.
De acuerdo a este artículo, de 27 casos que se presentaron durante los últimos 3 años, únicamente 2 han sido enviados a la oficina del fiscal para ser revisados.
Esos son casos que uno de los periodistas consiguió y no sé de dónde, pero no sabemos cuáles casos está hablando especialmente o particulares casos. Y cuando hallamos, podemos revisar eso.
Asimismo, Charles Rodriguez dijo que su departamento está dispuesto a colaborar con la Fiscalía en lo que sea necesario. De acuerdo al fiscal del distrito, el hecho de que el Departamento de Policía no pase estos casos para su revisión y prosecución si es necesario a la Fiscalía es algo que no es justo ni para ambas dependencias ni para la gente de nuestra comunidad. Maite Frangiuti, Reporter 41.
Se espera que los resultados de esta investigación se den a conocer dentro de 3 meses.
Eyewitness News, San Antonio's top-rated newscast.
A ski-masked teenager who allegedly fired a toy replica of an Uzi submachine gun at a San Antonio police officer last night may have just been pretending, but it took some restraint on the officer's part to keep from firing back real bullets. 8 officers and the police helicopter, Foxtrot, went into action at a Northwest Side apartment complex after Officer John Barlow reported he was shot at by the youth. Barlow said the shots sounded real and it looked as though flames shot out of the side of the gun. In fact, these are the guns the teenager and his brother were playing with. Chief Charles Rodriguez says toy guns like these are dangerous for anyone involved.
Those are the kinds of things that get officers in trouble, because if somebody points something like that at a police officer and he thinks it's real, that can come out to be a real problem for us. So I would advise people, don't play around with phony guns.
The boy who fired at Officer Barlow and his brother were taken to police headquarters for questioning and later released.
This is News 4 San Antonio at 10.
There is other news tonight. Police Chief Charles Rodriguez says he will cooperate with District Attorney Sam Millsap's request for files on a number of alleged police abuse cases, reportedly never sent to the DA's office for review. He also told our Dan Cuellar his reaction to the FBI probe of the sexual abuse case of police officer Milton Beretta.
DA Sam Millsap expressed concern that while citizens' complaints may not be readily referred to his office for review, complaints filed by police against citizens are processed quickly and, at least in one case, perhaps hastily. In that case, police officer Milton Beretta had filed a terroristic threat charge in Judge Robert Lozano's court against these, a young man who claimed he was sexually abused by the officer.
The officer was sure pushing it, said Judge Lozano. He wanted that kid tried so badly he wanted to execute the arrest warrant himself. But then the tables turned. A DA investigator went to the judge and told him that the officer's charge against the boy was null and void, that the true target of the investigation was the officer himself.
That is something currently being investigated by the FBI, which is trying to determine if the charges were trumped up, filed in order to protect the officer from criminal prosecution, denying these his civil rights. How does the chief feel about the FBI probe?
We welcome it.
Well, for the past few months, we have, of course, seen Dan's coverage of the Beretta case. But today, Dan became part of this story. He appeared before a second grand jury investigating allegations of a cover-up in the Beretta case. Those allegations were prompted in large part by interviews Dan did with a majority of the jurors who indicted the police officer. They charged official misconduct on the part of police and city officials, obstruction of justice, and lack of cooperation on the part of the DA's office. The grand jury will continue to evaluate testimony from the previous grand jury as well as police reports to determine if further investigation is necessary.
This is News 4 San Antonio at 5.
Police Chief Charles Rodriguez today announced that he and the District Attorney Sam Millsap have reached an agreement in which Millsap will help formulate changes in the way police send cases of alleged police abuse to the DA's office for review. At a news conference this morning, the chief again admitted that there are problems in the present system and promised changes would be in place soon.
We should be through with our additional procedures here within the next week or so, and the district attorney is going to review that, and we're going to act on what we have to act on.
Meantime, the DA, Sam Millsap, says he is happy with the agreement.
And the only thing that makes sense is for there to be real close coordination so that when that policy is finally produced, everybody can say, this is not just the police department's policy, it's also my policy.
Millsap says his office is presently reviewing a number of cases sent to his office yesterday alleging police brutality, some of which reportedly were not previously sent for review and possible criminal prosecution. The DA expects to have his investigation complete in a few weeks.
Serving San Antonio and South Texas.
San Antonio Police Chief Charles Rodriguez says he will soon crack down on officers who use excessive force on citizens. At a news conference today, the chief said a new set of internal affairs procedures will be in place by the first of the year. The chief and the IAD have been under fire because of 26 police brutality cases that never made it as far as the district attorney's office to be evaluated.
We handed those cases over to the district attorney yesterday. We handed over our internal affairs files, and he will review and evaluate, and we'll look at what it is that we have there and what we have to do about it.
Rodriguez says some of the complaints in question were filed 3 years ago. The new procedures call for, among other things, stiffer disciplinary action against SAPD personnel who use excessive force when they perform their duties.
En otro informe, hoy llamó a una conferencia de prensa el jefe del Departamento de Policía, Charles Rodríguez, para dar a conocer que ya fueron enviados a las oficinas de la Fiscalía los 25 casos de supuestos abusos de autoridad, entre los que se encuentran varios casos con gente en las minorías.
Está alegado, y lo que le dimos al oficial de disciplina no queda en lo que fue alegado, queda en otra razón, pero en el record que queda en la oficina de la comisión, bueno, tenemos que mirar a ver cómo están poniendo ellos la información en sus records.
Dijo además el jefe del Departamento de Policía que en los últimos 3 años se han presentado 600 casos similares y que el resultado de estos que se han presentado últimamente serán dados a conocer en la próxima semana.
This is News 4 San Antonio at 6.
The case was tried in Floresville on a change of venue because of all the publicity here. But local District Attorney Sam Millsap says he's elated with the sentences. Millsap says Trevino and Bautista both deserve to serve time, and he says it's a message that public corruption will not be tolerated.
Police Chief Charles Rodriguez now says problems with the way police brutality cases are handled should be corrected by the end of the year. Late yesterday, the chief sent a number of cases to the district attorney for review and possible criminal prosecution. The DA requested the files after learning a number of alleged brutality cases reportedly had not been sent to his office for review. This morning, the chief repeated his intention to clear the whole matter up.
We should be through with our additional procedures here within the next week or so, and the district attorney is going to review that, and we're going to act on what we have to act on.
The chief blames poor record-keeping at the Civil Service Commission and unclear policy at SAPD for such cases not being submitted to the DA's office on a consistent basis. He does not feel there was any attempted cover-up by some staff members and suspects that most cases were in fact sent to the DA.
Certainly the record doesn't indicate that it was, but that doesn't mean they weren't. So what the district attorney is looking at is one aspect of it, of course, is going to be whether in fact some of those cases were. And in looking at some of them initially, especially the more serious ones that are alleged not to have been sent over, my understanding is that some of them were.
And from all indications, the district attorney and the police chief have reached an understanding that the DA's office should be involved in any changes made in the method by which such cases are submitted here, something that the district attorney had been pushing for all along.
And the only thing that makes sense is for there to be real close coordination so that when that policy is finally produced, everybody can say, this is not just the police department's policy, it's also my policy.
In another development, Chief Charles Rodriguez today again denied reports that he has been job hunting elsewhere and has even made queries in California.
I guess people are, there's wishful thinking out there. I don't know. So I'm not going anywhere. I want to be here. I'm having a good time, so I'm really enjoying it. Okay.
Incidentally, the DA expects to complete his investigation of those alleged police brutality cases within a few weeks.
Oh.
La Policía de San Antonio y el Departamento del Control de Drogas todavía andan en busca de aproximadamente 30 personas que han sido acusadas de traficar heroína y otras drogas. Hasta el momento, 18 personas han sido arrestadas y acusadas de 56 actos criminales relacionados con el tráfico de drogas, como nos explica el jefe de la Policía de San Antonio, Charles Rodríguez.
Siendo que es una cosa que vamos a continuar durante los días de fiesta y vamos a estar listos para arrestar gentes que hemos investigado y que, ¿cómo le diré? Estamos trabajando undercover.
Bajo cubierta.
Cubierta, sí.
¿Cuánto tiempo se han venido llevando a cabo estas investigaciones?
Bueno, estas investigaciones han seguido por unos cuantos meses.
Como nos dice el jefe de la policía, en total 49 personas han sido acusadas de narcotráfico.
This is News 4 San Antonio at 5.
In other news today, Police Chief Charles Rodriguez called a press conference today to say that the San Antonio Police Department has not and will not pursue illegal aliens. The chief said it is against departmental policy. Now, earlier this week, as you may remember, we had a story about SAPD and the Border Patrol making sweeps through West Side bars looking for illegals. Rodriguez said they work with the Border Patrol, but that city officers were looking for weapons and drunks, not illegals.
We had no time. It is the department, and at no time, focused attention on arresting the illegal aliens. That was not part of our procedure. It was not part of our plan.
Rodriguez said the department's sweeps are in response to pressure from local politicians to clean up the violence around bars on Friday and Saturday nights.
Eyewitness News, San Antonio's top-rated newscast.
It was late last week that a San Antonio man claimed he was brutalized by a San Antonio policeman and then was mistakenly deported, despite his repeated claims that he was in fact a U.S. citizen. Well, Police Chief Charles Rodriguez today says his Internal Affairs Unit is looking into those charges, and he says the department has had a formal policy since 1974 against arresting illegal aliens unless they've done something else wrong. He also explained his reason for a series of raids on neighborhood bars by policemen and Border Patrol agents. It was during one of those raids that the arrest leading to the allegations of brutality took place.
The department at no time focused attention on arresting the illegal aliens. That was not part of our procedure. It was not part of our plan. Most of the arrests, in fact, all of the arrests that were made by the Border Patrol that have to do with illegal aliens.
Chief Rodriguez says if the allegations of brutality are found to be true, if the department finds any evidence of wrongdoing, he will turn the case over to the district attorney. He also says that San Antonio police had nothing to do with the recent well-publicized arrests of illegal aliens near the San Fernando Cathedral.
Serving San Antonio and South Texas.
A 28-year-old police cadet has been fired from the San Antonio Police Department. Cadet Chris Anderson was dropped from the police academy about 2 weeks ago when he broke a department rule that bars cadets from carrying weapons. Anderson was carrying an unloaded gun when he broke up an attempted mugging. Anderson filed suit to keep his job, but then agreed to drop the legal action if Police Chief Charles Rodriguez would reconsider his firing. Today, the chief says he did reconsider, but decided to terminate.
Recommendation, we looked at the violation, we evaluated what was there, we listened to the cadet's testimony and his attorney's testimony, and we reevaluated or evaluated and made the determination that he was going to be terminated.
Rodriguez says Anderson was told of his termination this afternoon.
En una nota relacionada, el Departamento de Policía negó hoy que se haya adoptado una práctica de arrestar a los indocumentados. El jefe de la policía, Charles Rodríguez, sin embargo, dice que cuando una persona indocumentada se arresta por violar las leyes locales, se le informa al Departamento de Inmigración, y agrega que en algunas ocasiones el Departamento de Policía le pide ayuda a la patrulla fronteriza cuando se sospecha que hay indocumentados en las cantinas, especialmente en el lado oeste de la ciudad.
Estamos haciendo, lo hemos estado haciendo varios meses y no es una cosa así solamente que llegamos y estamos buscando ilegales. Eso no. Nosotros, ¿cómo le diré? La póliza de este departamento es que nosotros no arrestamos ilegales nomás por ser ilegales, sino si hay otro crimen, esa es otra cosa.
This is News 4 San Antonio at 6.
The Texas Civil Liberties Union says today that despite San Antonio's reputation for emerging progressive leadership, our city had the worst overall record in the state in 1985 when it came to protecting citizens' civil liberties. The TCLU cited the city's rock concert ordinance, the threatening letters that went to AIDS victims, control of the content of movies shown at a public art theater, and what it called a rising pattern of brutal police practices by the San Antonio Police Department and the intimidation of people who filed complaints. While the rock ordinance has been getting most of the attention, the discussion about police review procedures has just recently started to heat up. News 4's Dan Locke has been looking at the police department's internal affairs procedures and what the politicians have been saying about them.
I think what San Antonio needs to do more than anything else is to devise a better system of dealing with internal police grievances. And I think the best way to do that is to have some sort of citizen input into it. And you have to have some sort of hearing. You know, a lot of these cases, you don't even have a hearing. The citizen sends in a written complaint. The police will evaluate that written complaint and make their decision on that. People who never even saw the citizen.
And there have been allegations that those written complaints are sometimes changed by internal affairs officers. Just yesterday, the stepfather of an 18-year-old West Side boy made that charge.
You thought that the police officer was trying to change Saul's story?
Right, to make it look like the officer was standing in front of him instead of behind him.
So you got up and walked out?
I walked out, yes.
During the past week, first Police Chief Rodriguez and then Mayor Henry Cisneros have publicly pointed out that the department is making changes in the way it handles civilian complaints against police officers. None of those changes, though, seem to address the problems that the Texas Civil Liberties Union has pointed out.
Are you considering putting any civilians in that review system?
No.
Have you considered allowing the complainant, so to speak, to have a hearing before the Internal Affairs Board?
No.
Why not?
Well, primarily, then we'd be going through a full trial here, and I don't think we're geared for that. I think if the allegations are there, the citizen has a recourse, and the recourse has to do with any number of agencies that they can go to. They go to the courts and so forth.
We are moving with pressure from council members, notably Walter Martinez, toward new systems of reviewing complaints against police officers. And so I don't think we have anything to apologize for. We are showing movement.
Not enough movement to satisfy Martinez, though, and he called a press conference this afternoon to say that.
I don't think it's enough to say that we want to appoint an assistant DA or an assistant city attorney, and that should suffice for citizen review on that or participation on that board.
Martinez realizes that he may end up bucking both the police department and the mayor on this one, but he said that he's found broad public support of the idea of putting civilians into the process. And if he has to, he'll take the matter to the city council. Dan Locke, News 4, San Antonio.
Eyewitness News, San Antonio's top-rated newscast.
Concern over the handling of complaints against police officers has led to a lot of discussion about the police review process. Today, City Council heard the police chief outline a compromise on that complaint procedure. Norma Barnes is at City Hall now live with a report. Norma?
Well, first of all, Fred, the chief's plan does not include a civilian member to sit on the review board. He showed council members a chart outlining the formal complaint process. He said the complaint is taken by the Internal Affairs Division, which then conducts an investigation. It'll use a polygraph test on an officer if necessary. And anything which has any criminal overtones will be turned over to the Criminal Investigation Unit to determine whether the case needs to go to the district attorney. If no criminal charge is involved, the complaint then goes through the Administrative Advisory Board. The 7-member board already has 2 non-voting observers, including Assistant City Attorney and a representative of the Police Officers Association. What the chief proposed, the change, is that right after the investigation by the Internal Affairs Division, the Assistant City Attorney should review the case before it goes to the chief. Then after the chief's decision, the case would be again reviewed by the Assistant City Attorney.
There is a discrepancy. He would bring it to my attention. We would have to deal with it. We would have to review it. And if there is still some concern and some lack of agreement between the city attorney and the chief of police, then it would go to the city manager.
Now, it did not include the proposed idea by Councilman Martinez that it should include a civilian either in a voting or as an advisory capacity. So City Council is still discussing the chief's plan, and they will be voting whether to approve it or not. And it looks like they probably will approve what the chief has suggested. Everybody else seems to be pretty much in favor of the changes.
Norma Barnes at City Hall, thank you.
This is News 4 San Antonio at 6.
Good evening. I'm Sharon Jones. Dan Cuellar is under the weather tonight. The San Antonio Police Officers Association is taking action to save the job of a fired patrolman. The union filed suit against Police Chief Charles Rodriguez in what may turn out to be a precedent-setting legal battle. News 4 reporter Dan Locke is in our newsroom with details. Dan?
Sharon, the lines have been drawn over a case involving Officer Fernando Gonzalez, who was accused of beating up a truck driver who was in town back in June. It was the 6th time that Officer Gonzalez was reprimanded by the police department, and a number of those times were for excessive use of force.
Chief Rodriguez cited those previous disciplinary actions when he decided to indefinitely suspend Officer Gonzalez. And today he came to the Police and Fire Commission hearings to back up his reasons.
What we're saying is that we're now looking at incidents that have occurred in the past that have a tendency to show a pattern of activity, and this is what I think we have to do in order to deal with officers that may be getting a little bit out of hand in terms of their activities out in the field.
Apparently, the chief has been pushing for this for some time, almost from the time he arrived here. But Assistant City Attorney Jake Talley said that it wasn't until a fairly recent court decision involving a similar case that the city felt it had the legal precedent it needed to cite an officer's entire record when it determined the disciplinary action.
The attorney for the Police Association, Joe Scurll, went to district court this morning and got a temporary restraining order from Judge James Onion to keep the commission from taking action until they could argue the legal questions. I talked to Scurll this afternoon. He said that this action by the city directly violates the Police Association's contract with the city, in that it says in the contract that the police chief can go back no more than 6 months in finding old disciplinary actions to cite in his suspension case. Sharon?
Dan, a couple of days ago we reported that there was another officer that was involved in this alleged incident. Is his case affected?
Not by this precedent-setting legal action. That's Officer Lowell Hull. He received a 30-day suspension, but the chief didn't cite any previous disciplinary action, and so therefore his case will be held tomorrow at 1 o'clock without fail.
All right, Dan. Thank you very much.
Serving San Antonio and South Texas. Now, KSAT 12 News.
The head of the Police Officers Association calls it a complete turnaround, an increase, he says, in the number of officers being suspended by the police chief. KSAT 12 Police Beat reporter Mary Walker says the chief denies that, and because of his new procedure, a battle between the two sides could be brewing.
The chief is suspending people left and right without the proper evidence, without the proper documentation. He's passing it on to the commission because he doesn't want to fade the heat.
It was an angry police association president who made that charge against the chief. In the past month, the association attorney says he has received notification that 12 officers are to be suspended. The charges vary: excessive use of force, discharging a weapon, verbal abuse, and falling asleep on the job.
If there are suspensions occurring, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're getting any rougher, it's just that we're catching more. And that usually is a product of a better investigation and a more of a concern with what is going on in the field.
And for the first time, he has started using prior records of police officers to determine their discipline.
So that if there's a pattern, certain kinds of violations, then eventually we will, have to look at that and deal with it.
And Rodriguez says he is hoping to bring more consistency to the way officers are disciplined, but there will no doubt be certain constraints. The chief also believes that once this procedure is in place and once officers realize it will be followed, then certain police actions in the field just may slack off. Mary Walker, KSAT 12 News.
Serving San Antonio and South Texas. Now, KSAT 12 News.
Good evening. I'm Deborah Daniels.
And I'm Rick Benjamin. San Antonio's Police Chief Charles Rodriguez now says he will comply with a request made by the District Attorney's Office. KSAT 12's police beat reporter Mary Walker says the request involves alleged charges of police brutality.
The request came in this letter from the DA. It asked that Chief Charles Rodriguez send him internal affairs files involving valid cases in which citizens alleged they were assaulted by police officers. He wanted cases dating back 2 years. One of those allegations came from this man, Leroy Cibrian. He claims that earlier this year he was beaten while handcuffed by the police officer who arrested him. He says the case never went to the DA's office, but that the officer involved was reportedly reprimanded. Today, Chief Charles Rodriguez announced at a morning news conference that he would gather the internal affairs files requested by the DA and turn them over to that office.
My reaction to the letter is that it points out that perhaps there is a need for the public to understand what we're doing, and if it requires that the district attorney then look at what we're doing in terms of our investigations and so forth, then that's the direction we'll take if we have to.
Rodriguez says he is also reviewing the way officers are disciplined for valid complaints of alleged excessive force.
We're in the process of trying to strengthening up our procedures rather than our total policy. As you go along, there are going to be times when perhaps information has to be more aggressively obtained. In other words, instead of having people come to us, we got to go to people.
Rodriguez says plans to tighten up the disciplinary procedure should be completed by the end of the year. Mary Walker, KSAT 12 News.
Eyewitness News, San Antonio's top-rated newscast.
The San Antonio Police Department swore in 32 rookies today, including 9 women officers, the largest number ever to graduate in one police academy class. As Jack Atherton reports, the training was especially hard for one of those women.
Straight down and straight line.
Police Academy would have been the toughest 24 weeks of Thelma Valdez's life, even if her husband hadn't died during the course of it.
A lot of times I found myself daydreaming and wondering, what was I doing here? And I figured I was better off staying in school than going home and sitting, doing nothing.
The most agonizing assignment was responding to her first car crash.
A person was killed, and it was similar to what my husband's situation was, and I handled it very well.
Just as well as she and the 31 other cadets graduating today, including Thelma's sister, handled firearms, learning the law, and physical conditioning by butt-kicking sergeants.
You're like a piece of steel on the outside, right? That's right. Now you're taller than me anyway, right? That's right. So it doesn't bother you.
But that took a lot more work than Thelma's old job, substitute teaching, and a lot of patience for her 2 young daughters.
It's kind of hard because she would come home real late and she'd study, and then she would never have time for us.
But now she'll work nights when the kids are sleeping, and
when they get home from school, I'll be there to spend all day with them. So it'll really work out well for me.
Maybe even better than before. Now that your mother's carrying a gun, are you going to listen to her more?
Yeah.
And Thelma hopes it'll also work out well for the rape victims and battered wives she especially wants to help.
Well, to her fellow officers, Thelma is now Rookie Valdez. And of course, we have to call her Officer Valdez. But for 2 people, she's still going to be Mommy. Jack Atherton, Channel 5, Eyewitness News.
El Departamento de Policía aquí en San Antonio cuenta ahora con 32 nuevos oficiales de la policía. Andrés Ricardo Morín tiene todos los detalles.
Los residentes de San Antonio podrán dormir más tranquilos de mañana en adelante, ya que cuentan con más protección policial. Hoy se graduaron 32 jóvenes policías, aumentando así el número de la fuerza local a 1.308, faltando solo 14 para cumplir con la cuota que ha fijado la ciudad. En breves ceremonias, el jefe Charles Rodríguez efectuó la tradicional inspección a los novatos, que incluyen 9 mujeres, 2 de ellas hermanas. En el foro del Teatro Beethoven se entregaron los diplomas que los acreditan oficialmente como policías de la ciudad de San Antonio. La secretaria del municipio, Norma Rodríguez, les tomó juramento que los compromete a vigilar, proteger y cuidar los intereses del ciudadano y San Antonio. Los ahora nuevos policías se felicitaron a sí mismos, recordando que las últimas 24 horas semanas de riguroso entrenamiento son ahora realidad. Las hermanas Telma Vázquez y Margarita García nos mostraron su emoción.
Este día, hijo, pues no tengo las palabras.
Está muy emocionada.
Ajá. Mi corazón está muy grande.
Estos graduados inician sus labores mañana por la tarde y noche y oficialmente como patrulleros el 1 de febrero. Andrés Ricardo Morín, reportero 41.
This is News 4 San Antonio at 6.
Last year, 187 people died because of violent crime in our city, and year after year, according to police statistics, most of the violent crime in our city is found on the west side. Tonight at 10, News 4's Roy Ruttanen begins a 5-part series on the subject of violent crime in West Side Story.
There are certain areas that have an excessive amount of homicides, and unfortunately, there are areas on the west side that do.
Photographer Roy Ibarra and Ruttanen also spent time with a police officer on a routine patrol of the west side. What they came back might surprise you. Part 1 of West Side Story tonight at 10.
This is News 4 San Antonio at 10.
Texas may be the biggest and the best when it comes to a lot of things. There is the dubious distinction of being one of, if not the state, with the highest murder rate in the nation. And San Antonio has contributed. Tonight, News 4's Roy Ruttanen begins a 5-part series of reports on violent crime in our city. San Antonio saw a 10% increase last year, and some say it's going to get worse. And year after year, one area of the city gets hit the hardest. Part 1 now of West Side Story. Police
are looking for a suspect. That makes 5 murders in just 12 hours. Police say there is nothing.
You've just seen some of the results of violent crimes that occur all over San Antonio. Last year, 187 people were murdered in the Alamo City. And according to authorities, most of the bodies turn up down there on the city's west side.
There are certain areas that have an excessive amount of homicides, and unfortunately, there are areas on the west side that do.
People think just because the west side, this street right here, just because it has a lot of bars, think that, you know, it's a lot of crime going on. It's not that bad.
So we've got a couple of goose sniffers and some prostitutes walking the street. That's it.
Then we asked him about a recent killing nearby.
Right across the street there was a killing, yeah. But that guy was, you know, I don't know, it was a family problem, you know.
As a former gang member, and I've got the tattoos to prove it, I love the West Side. None of us have become cynical, because to us, a way of life is that there is a stoicism that we say, hey, that's the way life is.
You know, during the daytime, it's, you know, like an average neighborhood. It's set. The nighttime is when you have to worry about the people around you.
Just before midnight, we join Officer Tony Smith on his West Side patrol.
I'm looking for things that don't fit.
We drive through dimly lit streets. It's a cold night, and people are sitting around open fires or just hanging out on a corner. Then Smith spots a man laying in the street.
Wake up. How you doing?
Come on, get up.
It's 6-6, you got a wagon available.
Our next stop is a call for a disturbance at this bar.
What's that? That car? They said they were going to go get a gun and shoot us off.
It's early Saturday morning, and Smith is sent to an apartment complex where a woman wants a man to leave.
Go and tell him to take his hand out of his pocket.
The man leaves peacefully. Soon after, we're racing to a burglary. A suspect's in custody, so we hit the streets again. Smith tells us that most of the problems here happen in the same neighborhood.
We got a lot of the neighborhoods around here are really good neighborhoods, with the exception of just the small parts. You know,
so it's pockets.
Exactly. It's pockets or hot spots, we call them.
He says it's a slow night, but around 3, shots are fired at a card game.
Just thought maybe I'd let you know if you want to take a quick shot or something. No, they're bound to move.
First shooting we got over here, the officers arrived, found one man apparently dead, another one shot lying on the floor.
Gilberto Lemus had walked into a card game looking for Ernesto Gutierrez. He pulled a gun and shot Gutierrez, who died a few hours later. A third man then shot and killed Lemus and took off before police arrived. But why are so many violent deaths occurring on the west side? Some thoughts on that tomorrow. Roy Rutanen, News 4, San Antonio.
This is News 4 San Antonio at 10.
You can't close down the west side, but for many years now, more people have been dying on that part of our city than any other area of San Antonio. Tonight, in part 2 of his series, West Side Story, Roy Rutanen examines some of the reasons why.
Last year, almost half of San Antonio's 187 homicides were concentrated on the west side. And according to police statistics, it's been that way year after year. Just what is it about this side of town that attracts so much violent crime?
90% of the people are just people. They're good, honorable people. Because people live in a poverty situation, that they're more prone to take care of their own little world, their own few little possessions.
We have a high illiteracy rate here in our city, and particularly in some of the poorer areas of our city. So I think that has a lot to do with it.
Very, very high unemployment, large areas of the city where the housing is substandard, where we have the kind of environment that invites the type of individuals from all over the city to commit crimes.
There are more people and more bars here than any other section of town.
You know that is a low-income area. People have many problems. They suffer many frustrations. And once they get to drinking and they're in that bar, they vent those frustrations and they get into arguments and fights, and somebody has a weapon, somebody gets killed.
Guns. I notice here, very prevalent, where people carry guns, rifles in their cars, they go hunting and so forth. So there is that idea of, I need a gun. The other thing that I think is very important here is that there seems to be an idea of machismo.
If I find him, I'll kill him. People that don't understand look at machismo as a person walking down the street with a chip on his shoulder, thumping his chest. That's not a macho. A macho is a person who takes care of his personal possessions, of his family, and the very few things that he has.
And there's no doubt that the west side has its share of drug-related homicides, but those aren't easy to detect.
Usually alcohol is a causative factor, or when you consider drugs, as they relate to murder, usually will not be a causative factor. It's a motive.
Some people believe that illegal aliens are to blame, but according to police, most of the time, they're the victims.
The people out here on the west side know that you can roll a wetback or mohawk, and he's going to be hard to find later when it comes time to go to court or even to press charges. They're real reluctant to call the police.
There are victims of violent crime, those who are touched by it, but others may be affected by it as well.
unfortunately, a very high number of children who are growing up seeing this.
And here are some of their faces. I've covered more murders in this city than I care to remember. No matter what time, day or night, children from toddlers on up are attracted to them. Just what effect does witnessing such crimes have on young minds? We'll be exploring the answers to that question tomorrow in the next segment of West Side Story. Roy Rutanen, News 4, San Antonio.
This is News 4 San Antonio at 10.
Violence is brought into children's lives through TV shows, news, rock videos, and comic books. But for some children, the scenes of violent crime are too real, many times in their own backyard. Tonight, Roy Rutanen examines the effects of violent crime on children in Part 3 of West Side Story.
They watch wide-eyed from the street, from behind windows and doors. Time and again they hear cries of agony and grief, and they see the results of yet another violent crime.
But one thing is for certain, if it's in a residential area, we're going to have small children along with grown-ups all over the place.
Children watch that happen time and time again, and that gives them a model, you know, so that when they're placed in similar situations, they repeat that. They repeat what they've observed. They would see that as a viable way of dealing with their own frustrations.
Rarely does a homicide occur in the home where kids see that, and then that becomes their way of life. They're going to go kill somebody else because they saw somebody already killed. That's not true.
The kids seeing it right before their eyes and seeing it several times, after a while they can easily conclude, well, if my daddy or my uncle or my friend can do it, I can too.
So, violent activities perpetuate themselves?
Yes, because of the way they've been brought up through their entire life.
Let's take an imaginary figure by the name of Chele. And Chele is placed in a situation where he's confronted with an accusation or a threat. And what he does is that he might shoot that person. That moment in time is really a representation of all the other moments, all the other frustrations in which he has dealt with that frustration in the same way, by acting on it, by being aggressive.
And a youngster sees this
and repeats that.
But these people aren't imaginary characters. This woman's about to learn that she's lost a third son to violence. Ernesto Cardenas had been beaten the night before and died in his sleep. Another brother had an idea who did it.
You I'll find him. I'll kill him.
Taught me how to shoot to kill. A specialist with a deadly skill. A skill I needed to have to be a survivor.
His mind is really the mirror through which he's going to see the world. And what he's putting in that mind today is what he's going to see tomorrow and in the future.
We don't know if the Cardenas brother ever made good on his threat, but revenge is just one of the motives that pushed San Antonio's homicides last year to 187. That's just 5 short of the record. But what are the solutions to our city's growing rate of violent crime? We'll have some suggestions tomorrow in the next chapter of West Side Story. Roy Rutanen, News 4, San Antonio.
This is News 4 San Antonio at 10.
Texas has been in the top 2 for the highest murder rate in our nation for most of this decade, and San Antonians saw an increase of 10% just last year. It is a problem that has almost become a way of life for some, others continuing to try to fight back. Tonight, Roy Rutanen explores some of the possible solutions to violent crime on the West Side in Part 4 of West Side Story.
A woman tells us that a juvenile broke windows out of her car, but when police asked her to press charges, she refused.
If you do it, they come back again and do you something else more better than that.
Police Chief Charles Rodriguez is familiar with the woman's plight. He grew up in a Los Angeles ghetto.
One of the problems we used to have, of course, in those days is that people didn't want to get involved. In many instances, people do hesitate to call the police, and therefore we're not We're not apprised of what's going on.
We, the Hispanics, have been raised on a history of not trusting enforcement agencies. Now that, in the recent years, has changed. We still have some of that sense that the police authorities are there to protect the affluent. They are not there to protect the poor.
Bueno, y dejaron unos muertos ahí y robaron la tiendita. Necesitamos muchos policías aquí que los miren, porque yo ya estoy vieja.
Prevention should be the greatest emphasis, in that there is an opportunity for the police department through increased police officers to really improve on the crime prevention, the deterrent factor.
I wish that people would stop relying on us to reduce it and prevent it. The problems are social and economic, and they're problems that we cannot resolve.
Violent crime is spontaneous. So when you try to look at it from a preventative standpoint, I can't see any way.
But one successful deterrent is the city's repeat offenders program.
It's going to take the people who are the habitual criminals and really harass them and really make their lives complicated, disrupt their patterns of crime.
Police are also concerned about the number of bars.
Alcohol is definitely a contributing factor to homicide. If we had the neighborhood people maybe that live in this particular area that would get involved into how many licenses for premises are actually given out, maybe we can slow it down.
But nothing's going to work unless the public gets involved.
If you don't feel secure in addressing neighborhood problems alone, you can do it collectively and set up a system of maybe calling anonymously. All of those things can come into play, and they have in some neighborhoods, and they've been very successful.
Police deal with the results of crime, not with the roots of it. West Side poverty must be considered.
Obviously, to lower the poverty rate. Through affirmative action, you lower it through raising salaries, to providing jobs, lowering the dropout rate, educate people more.
Are you satisfied with what's being done now?
No.
I'd like to blame it on a whole host of social factors, but that isn't a very convenient set of explanations. I'd like to blame it on unemployment or something. I don't think that explains it.
Yet the city's current social services budget is close to $7 million.
I'm concerned that we're spending too much money in delegating some of our responsibilities and doing treatment type of work instead of doing preventive work.
Some of the reasons for violent crime are more obvious than others, but there's a change occurring here on the West Side that could be the most significant contributing factor of all. We'll take a look at that tomorrow in the final segment of West Side Story. Roy Rutana, News 4, San Antonio.
This is News 4 San Antonio at 10.
In other news now, tonight we have the conclusion of our series on violent crime on San Antonio's West Side. Last night in West Side Story, we heard a variety of solutions. Well, tonight Roy Rutanen examines what could be the root of the problem, the breakdown of the family unit.
It's been described as a community that takes care of its own. Some streets look like any neighborhood, while others reflect a less desirable lifestyle.
They find themselves in a pit of misery, and they don't see any hope. I think nothing has hurt the Hispanic family more than the increase in the abuse of alcohol and then drugs seeping into the family.
He says many of the problems on the West Side are contagious.
When you hear so many people saying, what's the use, there's no hope for us, those who had hope began to lose it. Because they continue to tell one another, no one cares and nobody's really doing anything about it.
Frankly, if I had an additional $100,000 to spend, I don't know where one would begin on the issue of violent crime.
But some people are looking for answers. Family counseling is one of the many services offered by the Inman Christian Center.
What we have seen here in our area where we work, a breakdown in terms of the cohesiveness that we used to see in the families that we work with. More single parents now with raising children.
Like me, for instance, you know, I gotta support me and my son, you know, do whatever I can to support him because my husband, you know, just...
Predominantly men are contributing to this delinquency and the rise of delinquency more so than anyone else, because it seems like when things get hard on them, they solve the problem by picking up and leaving, but very often to start another family.
Consequently, some children are left on their own.
I've long felt in my dealing with juveniles that a lot of the responsibility has to go back to the parents.
You don't start trying to correct a child when they're 14 and 15 years of age. You have to start much earlier in life, and they have to have some sort of discipline. They don't have that now.
Some of these parents need guidance themselves because they were reared in the same environment that they're rearing the children.
We're spending about $7 million in social services, and that we're trying to spend it where we can do some good.
Very often we're only dealing with the result and we're not dealing with the causes.
We have to recognize that this problem is occurring all over the city. I think that a lot of programs need to be reevaluated in terms of their effectiveness.
I don't think that the proper thing to do is to try to talk in terms of misplaced priorities or refunding money that is now going to needed social services. I think that's really a pointless argument.
There's nothing that exists out there that provides for the amenities of life, provides for effective, efficient recreation activities.
If we are to have these children develop an image, let's develop a good image for them. Let's show them that there's another way of life and not necessarily a criminal way.
I wish we could end this series of reports on a positive note, but unfortunately that's not possible. With the growth of our city, it seems that more violent crime is inevitable.
I really see the problem as very big and see that we're not doing enough to solve it, and the problem is getting worse.
San Antonio's body count this year stands at 10. So far. Roy Rutanen, News 4, San Antonio.
Now, we should tell you Roy's West Side Story series was completed last week. Since then, San Antonio has recorded an additional 4 homicides, bringing the total in the first 6 weeks of 1986 to 14.
And the U.S. Justice Department now says it will issue a federal grand jury subpoena tomorrow to District Attorney Sam Millsap. They're going to request all his records pertaining to the sexual abuse case of Officer Milton Barrera. Now, the move is the latest development in the case, which only 2 weeks ago was dropped by the DA, citing inconsistencies in the accuser's story. Reyes Ruiz, a teenage ward of Barrera, had accused the officer of sexually abusing him. Now, ironically, as the Justice Department move was unfolding, Police Chief Charles Rodriguez was telling News 4 he had reinstated the officer for the force only yesterday, temporarily placing him in a desk job. Rodriguez, unaware of the Justice Department move, said he felt vindicated when the DA dropped the case.
I think the courts have already made their decision, and everything has been decided in one way or the other, and it should die. It should, you should just stop harassing the man.
Late this afternoon, a spokesman at the police department says despite the Justice Department's move, Barrera will remain on the force until further notice.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Dan Quayle.
And I'm Sharon Jones. The U.S. Justice Department says it will issue a federal grand jury subpoena tomorrow to District Attorney Sam Millsap.
The subpoena will be requesting all documents Millsap's office may have pertaining to the sexual abuse case of Officer Milton Barrera. Millsap has been unavailable for comment. The Justice Department has been looking into the case and is yet to come to a decision. Moments ago, we'll have this report now on this story right now.
He's going to be inside for a while.
He's going to be inside for a while?
Mm-hmm.
Administrative job?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Barrera's case had been the center of controversy for months. First, a police review board made up of Barrera's fellow officers recommended Barrera be fired for his alleged part in the case. But Chief Rodriguez overruled that recommendation and instead suspended the officer for 10 days. The chief came under fire after a Bexar County grand jury indicted Barrera on a sexual abuse charge. Months later, and only 3 months before the case was to go to trial, District Attorney Sam Millsap decided to drop the case, saying while he believed the accuser, that is these, had been abused, there were inconsistencies in his story. Today, Chief Rodriguez said he felt vindicated after Millsap dropped the case.
And let it go. I think the courts have already made their decision, and everything has been decided in one way or the other, and it should die. It should, you should just stop harassing the man.
In a related development this afternoon, District 5 Councilman Walter Martinez, in a speech before the Optimist Club, said he too felt the chief had been vindicated, but he chastised the district attorney for his handling of the case.
I believe it took the district attorney 5 months to evaluate that case. I think that's unfortunate. Perhaps that's part of the bureaucracy that's involved in looking at these cases, and I do believe that we could have done a better job in arriving at that decision.
Ironically, as these latest developments were unfolding, Police Chief Charles Rodriguez was telling News 4 that he reinstated Officer Barrera to the force only yesterday. Moments ago, Assistant District Attorney Carol Schubert told News 4 that his office has known for some time that the Justice Department would be requesting the records on the Barrera case. Schubert says as soon as possible they will comply with this subpoena.
Good evening, everyone. Tomorrow, the U.S. Justice Department will issue a federal grand jury subpoena to our DA, Sam Millsap.
The grand jury will be requesting all documents Millsap's office has pertaining to the sexual abuse case against police officer Milton Barrera. Assistant District Attorney Carol Schubert telling News 4 that office has known for some time about the subpoena and will comply as soon as possible. Now, ironically, last night, Barrera was reinstated on the force. Dan Cuellar tells us Barrera has been assigned to administrative duty.
No, he's going to be inside for a while.
He's going to be inside for a while? Mm-hmm. Administrative job?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Barrera's case had been the center of controversy for months. First, a police review board made up of Barrera's fellow officers recommended Barrera be fired for his alleged part in the case. But Chief Rodriguez overruled that recommendation and instead suspended the officer for 10 days. The chief came under fire after a Bexar County grand jury indicted Barrera on a sexual abuse charge. Months later, and only 3 months before the case was to go to trial, District Attorney Sam Millsap decided to drop the case, saying while he believed the accuser, they as these, had been abused, there were inconsistencies in his story. Today, Chief Rodriguez said he felt vindicated after Millsap dropped the case.
Let it go. I think the courts have already made their decision, and everything has been decided in one way or the other, and it should die. It should, you should just stop harassing the man.
I'm Dan Cuellar, News 4 San Antonio.
Apenas el miércoles, aquí en las viviendas, en los conjuntos habitacionales, en las viviendas públicas Lincoln Courts, la señora concejal Berriozábal organizó una junta. Tengo entendido que llamó, según comunicados de prensa, llamó la participación del señor jefe del Departamento de Policía, señor Charles Rodriguez, y está aquí con nosotros. Yo quiero preguntarle, ¿qué reporte, cómo nos puede informar lo que sucede aquí en Lincoln Courts?
Bueno, lo que está pasando es que la gente está muy preocupada porque hay muchos jóvenes que se juntan, que tienen, y causan muchos problemas. La gente tiene miedo, parece que están vendiendo narcóticos, parece que están tomando mucho en la calle y, problemas así de gente, ¿verdad? Y lo que queremos hacer nosotros es limpiar el barrio aquí. Y la gente ahorita parece que se está enojando y quieren acción.
Señor Rodríguez, ese es un problema muy serio.
Es una cosa que parece que sucede aquí de vez en cuando, porque hace 2 años que estuvimos aquí con la señora Berriozábal y limpiamos la área y parece que ya se volvió otra vez a la cosa que tenían hace unos 2 años. Y lo que tenemos que hacer nosotros es, venir a enforzar las leyes y hay mucha gente aquí que parece que no vive por aquí, parece que se juntan y vamos a tener que correrlos, ¿verdad?
O sea, muchos de los malhechores, por así decirlo, no son residentes de esta área. Señor Rodríguez, ¿qué se va a hacer por parte del Departamento de Policía que no se haya hecho antes? ¿Qué tan nuevo es el problema para usted y qué tan nuevos son las soluciones de lo que se habló en esta junta del miércoles pasado? Bueno, la cosa que vamos a hacer nosotros es... no son cosas nuevas así que no se han hecho anteriores, pero
Lo que estamos haciendo es solicitando la cooperación de las gentes aquí. Vamos a poner patrulla, vamos a tener elementos de crime prevention, de community relations, van a comunicarse con todos los residentes aquí, a ver qué creen ellos que son los problemas y nos vamos a dirigir a eso.
O sea que habrá agentes más, un número mayor de agentes aquí en esta área de Lincoln Courts.
Bueno, sí, por una temporada.
Por una temporada.
Sí.
Porque esto mismo pudiera suceder en otro sector de San Antonio. O sea, the manpower, o sea, el número de agentes no hay, es la realidad, no hay suficientes para combatir el crimen o ese tipo de problemas en todo San Antonio, señor.
Lo que necesitamos nosotros es ir, tenemos que poder mover los patrulleros a varias locales en la ciudad y eso es lo que vamos a hacer. Tenemos como le dicen, un unit de agentes en uniforme que vamos a poder hacer eso.
Se me ocurre, por ejemplo, una patrulla andar dando vueltas seguidas completamente, o sea, estar bien activos. Me imagino que eso es lo que se hace, pero que se hicieran más visibles, o sea, que aquí los residentes de Lincoln Courts vieran las patrullas, aunque fuera una, pero que hiciera un recorrido seguido. ¿Se puede hacer esto?
Bueno, lo que vamos a hacer es poner más gentes aquí y al principio van a ser muchos, pero ya más allá cuando se limpie la cosa ya van a ser menos, ¿verdad?
Señor, por último, tratándose del presupuesto de la ciudad, ¿está usted pidiendo más agentes del Departamento de Policía?
¿Sí estamos viendo más?
Sí. ¿Están pidiendo más al gobierno?
Claro, sí.
¿Cuál es el número? ¿Qué está pidiendo usted para su departamento, para combatir los problemas que tiene San Antonio?
Bueno, el número que pedimos o que creemos que vamos a pedir va a ser como unos 91 patrulleros. Pero eso también va a ser con capitanes y tenientes y sargentos, los supervisores.
¿Pero nuevos?
Nuevos, posiciones nuevas.
Muchas gracias, señor Rodríguez.
Pues, Marta.
Eyewitness News, San Antonio's top-rated newscast.
Today is National Police Memorial Day, a time to remember those police officers who have given their lives in the line of duty. This morning, a special ceremony was held on the steps of City Hall. Frank Guerra was there.
It is Christmas Eve 1983 and the temperature is dipping into the low 20s. Police are standing around numb, not because of the cold, but because they have just lost a friend and colleague. 4 days later, they bury Patrolman Gilbert Ramirez. At age 34, he left behind a wife and 2 children.
Patrolman Gilbert Ramirez, December 24th, 1983.
Today, Elma Ramirez still bears the pain, but she takes comfort knowing that her husband and other police who have lost their lives in the line of duty are not forgotten.
Today we acknowledge the fact that a number of our police officers here in San Antonio, a number of our police officers in Bexar County and throughout the nation have given their lives, have given their supreme sacrifice.
Today we stop as a community, we stop as a city government to say thank you to that one category of civil servant who leave their homes every morning not possibly knowing what may be in store before the day is out.
Over the years, 28 San Antonio police have lost their lives while on duty. This glass case of the police department displays their pictures and badges. They are not forgotten because time does not destroy fond memories, it enhances them.
It's what you feel in your heart.
Frank Guerra, Channel 5, Eyewitness News.
This is News 4 San Antonio at 5.
Some recent changes with the internal affairs of the San Antonio Police Department now. The division which handles citizen complaints against officers has moved from the police department to an office building behind Fiesta Plaza. The police station was the only place a person lodging a complaint against a member of the force could go up until 3 weeks ago, to an office on the 2nd floor right down the hall from the chief's office, to be exact. Well, now the Internal Affairs Division is housed in this new office building about a mile from the police station. Chief Charles Rodriguez says the move is part of a mandate by City Council to restructure internal affairs procedures and eliminate what was an intimidating atmosphere for citizens making complaints.
The idea of having a better place deals with being away from maybe the police environment which you get in this building. I think many people felt intimidated in coming to the police department, the police building. And then you couple that with, you know, trying to find a place to park and seeing all of the uniformed personnel running around. Yeah, I think there is that feeling.
Rodriguez going on to say the changes also include a staff increase for internal affairs, now enabling officers to take citizen complaints in the field.
This is News 4 San Antonio at 10.
76 local law enforcement officers on the road to Austin tonight. They've set out on foot to raise money for this week's Special Olympics and to generate a little goodwill as they go. But as our Hendrik Sabrandi reports tonight, there's a good-natured rivalry at work, too.
Watch them limber up on the police department front lawn. 56 police officers, 20 Bexar County Sheriff's deputies, ready to fly out of town feet first. What was the point?
To help, you know, raise money for the mental retardation, also for my aunts. I've got 3 mental retarded aunts, and they participate in the Special Olympics, so I'm doing it for them.
Each year, the Special Olympics brings mentally retarded athletes, ages 8 and up, to one spot to compete with each other. This year, that spot is Austin, and for the second straight year, local police are carrying a torch to the site of the games and bringing plenty of donations, too. The captain of the squad is the chief of police. He has plenty of competition.
You know, we have Lou Fox, the city manager, is also running with us.
You think that the police chief will be able to keep up with you?
He better.
Everyone on his team knows him as the Pete Rose of this event. Did you say you're the oldest one in the field here?
No, I think the chief is the oldest one. But I'll overcome that with persistence and technique, see, and I'll overcome youthful exuberance and energy.
You're not out to set a speed record?
No, listen, my speed record setting ended about 5 years ago, yeah.
Tonight, the chief of police was bringing up the rear for a cause that has no last place finishers. Hendrik Sabrandi, News 4, San Antonio.
Will he ever forgive us?
Oh, it's for a good cause, though. We'll just...
Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. We go to the police budget at this time, and the chief. Thank you, Chief. Good work. Good presentation. Chief Rodriguez is next up. Bob, would you take the chair, please? Mr. You were the last Mayor Pro Tem, and Mr. Harrington.
Okay, well, let's proceed with the chief's briefing from for the police department.
Mayor Pro Tem, or Acting Mayor.
Acting Mayor Pro Tem.
Acting Mayor Pro Tem, or Acting Mayor, members of the council. The police department's proposed budget for fiscal year 86-87 is $77,881,230. This represents an increase of 7.8% over the previous year. The major thrust of the proposed police budget focuses on personnel. This budget increases sworn strength of the police department by 88 positions from 1,321 to 1,409. Total strength of the department for both civilian and sworn positions is also increased by only 88, from 1,954 to 2,042. While we propose the addition of 9 clerical positions, we are also transferring 9 civilian positions from the police department. Thus, the net effective increase in civilian personnel for 86-87 is 0. As with other departmental budgets, major changes to the police department budget come in several areas. The categories are self-supporting service improvements, program reductions, mandated improvements, program improvements, and other considerations. I would like to review each of these categories. Regarding self-supporting service improvements, the San Antonio Police Department has proposed 2 programs to enhance delivery while doing so with user fees, thus making the enhancements self-supporting. 1, expanding the storage facility at the Groton Police Vehicle Storage Pound, and 2, restructuring the fees charged for vehicle towing and storage. The department projects that these service components will allow the department to more adequately enforce the ordinances of the city and will generate an additional $361,440, making the components self-supporting. Concerning program reductions, the San Antonio Police Department has identified 3 areas which can be reduced in appropriation without significantly impacting the operation of the department. These 3 areas are: 1, revision of the police and operational procedures governing the use of police undercover vehicles. 2, reduction of base budget allocations for police fiesta overtime by 20%. Reduction of police travel funds and reduction of police photographic supplies. And 3, elimination of 2 vacant computer installation technician positions. The total savings realized by these reductions, none of which will significantly impact the operation of the police department, is $252,534, or 3.5% of the fiscal year 85-86 operating budget. In the area of mandates, the San Antonio Police Department is faced with one major program mandate for fiscal year 86-87. That mandate is the operation of 4 police area stations located in north, east, south, and west quadrants of
This is News 4 San Antonio at 10.
Good evening. Alan is on vacation. The largest single-year increase in police officers is going into next year's budget. City Council has decided to make public safety its top priority. Almost a third of the entire city budget will pay for police, fire, and EMS. Jimmy Martinez tells us the number of new officers won't catch up with the city's growth, but with what was approved tonight, the council is already stretching its dollars.
Police Department's proposed budget for fiscal year 86-87 is $77,881,230.
The budget places a high value on public safety, 88 new police positions, an updated radio system. Same with fire and EMS budgets, 73 new fire positions, 2 new EMS units, and 3 new fire stations. Even though it wasn't initially on the list, the council decided to build a station at the already heavily developed Marbach and Loop 410 area. It will be built at the expense of a station promised to a newly annexed area near Walsham Road.
I don't like having to go and talk to people about bond issues, annexations, or spending caps when the rug is pulled out on a commitment that we have made. And I led the way in forging that commitment.
But there wasn't as much growth in the annexed area as originally expected, so the council will review its commitment next year.
And that's to add the funds for nine positions of firefighters.
Also not included in the budget was Berriozábal's request for even more firefighters, so that in 3 years, the city will reach its goal of 4 persons instead of 3 per pumper. Studies show it saves lives. The fire department says it costs money, $283,000 that hasn't been found yet. Add that to 10 new police detectives Frank Wing wants, and library and social service priorities set by the City Council last week. Halfway through its budget discussions and already $600,000 in the red. But the council says it can find the money before it's all over. Not included in that running total is $300,000 for summer youth recreation programs. So far, they've been cut out of the park's budget. And last week, when the council discussed it, it couldn't decide if it should go after that money as well. So they'll take up the park's budget again next week. Jibby Martinez, News 4 San Antonio.
Serving San Antonio and South Texas. Now, KSAT 12 News Tonight.
And some special people receive a gift from local law enforcement agencies. When some 80 law enforcement officers from San Antonio and the surrounding area took part in a run to raise money for the Special Olympics program, they had no idea how successful that run would be. Today they found out when Police Chief Charles Rodriguez presented a check to the Texas Special Olympics for a tidy sum. Richard Noriega has more.
And perhaps every year we're going to have even more.
The chief had a big smile on his face when he presented a check for $7,000 to Herb Manger, area coordinator for the Texas Special Olympics.
You know, we're trying to provide some kind of commitment to those that are needy, and certainly the people in the Special Olympics are needy.
The program is a year-round affair that allows handicapped children of all ages to take part in athletic competition.
There's a lot of people that are fond of the Special Olympics. It's an excellent program. The police department showed it by their hard work, and the actual fact that they went out and ran solid all the way through to Austin shows their support of Special Olympics.
On May 27th, some 50 San Antonio police officers, including the chief, took part in the first ever law enforcement torch run for Special Olympics. Joining them were about 20 Bexar County Sheriff's deputies, 6 officers from Selma, and another 4 from San Marcos. Their destination was Austin, and the following day they arrived, somewhat exhausted, but nevertheless jubilant over their accomplishment.
It represents an opportunity to show the citizens that we do a lot more than just write tickets and have to make arrests.
The event not only raised money, but it also raised the public's awareness of the Special Olympics. Already plans are underway for next year's torch run.
We'll probably be doing this every year. It appears that way.
Richard Noriega, KSAT 12 News Tonight.
Serving San Antonio and South Texas. Now, KSAT 12 News.
Good afternoon, I'm Bob Salter.
I'm Deborah Daniels.
It may seem like an impossible dream, but law enforcement and community leaders here want to wipe out the drug problem in our city by the year 1990. KSAT 12 Police Beat reporter Mary Walker says they began plans to meet that goal today by assembling a cast of who's who in the fight against drugs.
What's that? Stay off the dirt trail and stay in the grass so you don't see any tracks.
This is what they came to conquer, the enemy in the fight against an ever-increasing problem, drugs and drug abuse in San Antonio. Their goal, many of these leaders admit, is an ambitious one, a drug-free city by 1990. But just as many, like the head of the Drug Enforcement Administration, believe it is a realistic goal.
When law enforcement and prevention and treatment and cooperation are all moving forward in concert, we will minimize the drug problem in our society and in the Alamo City.
We're talking about enforcement, okay, and there's no doubt, I think, based on our statistics, that we're hitting enforcement. We're even hitting the high schools as much as we can.
And officials say the international fight against drugs is heating up as well, with 15 countries now involved in marijuana eradication programs. But the man who runs a teenage drug abuse hotline says the problem still seems to be on the rise.
As far as the percentage of people, juvenile as opposed to adult, it seems it's about a 50-50. We cab drivers call, man, I'm hooked on heroin, what can I do about it? A 13-year-old called me the other morning, what can I do about drugs?
Still, organizers believe that if everyone attending this two-day conference leaves determined to do something about the problem, the 1990 goal won't seem so far-fetched. Mary Walker, KSAT 12 News.
Muy buenas tardes, hoy es miércoles 16 de julio de 1986. Aquí en San Antonio, mientras tanto, hoy se llevó a cabo una reunión que fue diseñada para mejor coordinar las agencias policiales en su lucha contra el narcotráfico a nivel estatal. Andrés Ricardo Morín tiene los detalles.
El problema de las drogas en los Estados Unidos se torna cada día más serio y San Antonio se puede convertir en uno de los sitios predilectos de los narcotraficantes, al menos que se combata con todos los recursos disponibles. Personas de distintas profesiones asistieron a un seminario en el que se detalló exactamente lo peligroso que puede resultar si San Antonio, como otras partes de la nación, no frena el flujo de las drogas. El jefe de policía, Charles Rodríguez, expresó que se necesita más personal.
Tenemos que tener más gente en el departamento y el concilio ahorita parece que nos van a dar como unos 88 patrulleros. Ojalá con eso podemos aumentar los de narcotics.
Añadió el jefe Rodríguez que aquí en San Antonio y el condado de Bexar se efectúan arrestos casi semanalmente, pero según un agente federal, por otra parte, los narcotraficantes cuentan con suficiente dinero como para estar nuevamente en operación en cuestión de días. Joe Toft, el agente especial de la Administración de Drogas en San Antonio, dice que es necesario obtener más ayuda económica y agentes federales a la vez que se educa al público sobre el problema.
Los narcotraficantes tienen acceso a mucho más dinero de que nosotros tenemos. Es un negocio de que el dinero es realmente increíble y por lo cual ellos pueden comprar protección, etcétera, en muchos lugares.
La reunión continúa hasta mañana con la participación también de jóvenes interesados en combatir las drogas en las escuelas. La senadora Cindy Cryer enfatizó que tal vez no se elimine el problema hoy, pero que es un paso seguro para el mañana. Andrés Ricardo Morín, Reporter 41.
Serving San Antonio and South Texas. Now, KSAT 12 News Tonight.
Tonight, a law enforcement offensive in the war on drugs. Armed with arrest warrants, a 70-officer strike force of federal, county, and city lawmen fanned out to arrest dozens of drug suspects. The arrests started early. Suspects indicted for drug dealing were hauled in one after another. The arrests continue at this hour, and so far the sweep has netted more than 20 suspected pushers, including several charged with dealing drugs at or near school campuses. Police say tonight's sweep may be just a dent, but it will help.
I don't know whether we ever impact drug trafficking in terms of a elimination of that, but I think it's going to make a little dent in it. Anytime we make arrests and we get people off the street that are dealing, we make an impact.
Tonight's raid wraps up a 6-month undercover operation.
Recommending that we pass the rate that was that was approved last year, 41 cents, and we stay at that. We've run some preliminary estimates on the revenue received from property taxes, and I think the council is aware that we have no reappraisal this year. And so the principal growth in the property tax roll comes from improvements, new improvements and annexation. So that's it. I would welcome any questions you might have at this time. We have a schedule that we've recommended. It's attached to the city manager's message, and we hope to go through the various segments of the budget, the functional areas. Next week, Human and Cultural Services and the Library Board will be here. Public Safety the next week, Development Services the next week, and then our public hearing on July the 8th. I'd be glad to answer any questions. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Lou. And let me just tell you, I think you've done an excellent job of preparing this budget, considering the shortfalls in revenues and where we have been over the last months, which was the potential of a $28 million actual deficit between revenues and needs. You've done an excellent job in figuring out how that can be balanced and presented us with a balanced budget. No doubt there are choices and there are decisions that the council will have to make, some difficult ones, and probably some revenues that the council might want to handle differently, and some cuts that the council might want to handle differently, and benefits issues and such. And that's why we're starting on this process. But I believe the city manager has shown why he is regarded as one of the top in his field in the country. And we're lucky, I think, as San Antonians to have him on the job working for this city, which over the years has not only improved its fiscal ranking as against the other cities of the country, but continued to improve its services. And so let me just say as one that I think you've done an excellent job. We have work to do in cleaning up at the edges, but on the whole, you presented us a budget that if we were to adopt it in this form today, if we were, it would serve this city well. So I compliment you for that.
Thank you.
I have two matters that I would like to raise, just put on the table in a general sense, and then we'll get to you can tell us when we can take them up in detail. One of them is the suggestion by the county tax collector, Rudy Garza, that we ought to seriously this year consider the idea of merging the county tax collections with the city's tax collections, a function which in its present configuration costs the city some $3 million a year, but which, if it could be merged with the county, could probably be done
or something in the range of $500,000 a year. Over the years, I have felt that the city needed to protect its prerogatives, and that I was fearful that, given that that's an elective county position, that if another person were elected, clearly Rudy Garza is a very capable and competent person, but he won't be there forever, that if another person were elected, that the quality might fall off, and that we would be entrusting to another level of government a function so critical to our fiscal strength that it simply couldn't do it. And secondly, that